Stars have always fascinated people. They inspired interest and were uncharted beacons. Humanity craved new worlds and dreamt of flying into space. On April 12, 1961, this dream came true. It was announced on all radios worldwide.
Говорит Москва. Передаем сообщение ТАСС о первом в мире полете человека.
The spaceship Vostok rose to an altitude of about 190 miles.
Yuri Gagarin è partito. La più grande avventura del secolo è cominciata.
Социалистических республик. Летчик-майор Гагарин Юрий Алексеевич.
Yuri Gagarin was an ordinary boy who was among those who dreamt of the stars. He loved planes and thought about becoming a pilot ever since he was a child. Once, together with his classmates, he made a flying model of a plane from reeds and a combustion engine. The math and physics teachers, as well as the school's head teacher, were fascinated watching the flight. 20 years later, along with the entire world, they would watch breathlessly as Yuri Gagarin piloted the first ever manned spacecraft. At 3:30 Moscow time, specialists woke up Yuri Gagarin. After some light exercises, a rinse down, and a breakfast fed via special tubes, the cosmonaut was taken to the assembly and test section for pre-flight inspection and putting on his spacesuit. When Yuri Gagarin was about to walk towards the spacecraft, it was suddenly noticed that there were no identification marks on the helmet. No one thought about it in advance. Only a few hours remained until the flight. A spacesuit specialist suggested a solution. He brought out red paint and drew the letters of the USSR on the helmet without even removing it. On October 27, 1955, Yuri Gagarin joined the Army. Then he was sent to aviation school, which he completed with honors. After graduation, he served in the 769th Fighter Aviation Regiment. In the summer of 1959, a group of field medics visited the regiment. They had been studying the pilot's personal files and were to conduct interviews. During the interview, they casually asked the main question, "Would you like to pilot a spacecraft around the Earth?" It's apparent what answer Yuri Gagarin gave. The selected candidates were moved to Moscow for further examination at the Central Research Aviation Hospital. Yuri Gagarin arrived there on October 7th and remained under examination for almost a month. The future cosmonaut joked about his medical clearance. There were many doctors, each of them as rigorous as a prosecutor. Apart from the medical examinations, he also underwent stress tests. He was tested in an aerospace chamber, spun in a centrifuge, and shaken in a vibrochair. His body was also checked for hypoxia resistance. After all examinations and tests, the commission confirmed that his health was perfect. A total of 20 people were chosen from 352 cosmonaut candidates. Yuri Alexeyevich Gagarin was among them. At 7:10, the cosmonaut took his seat in the Vostok spacecraft and made contact under the call sign Cedar. Then, he connected his suit to the ventilation system and checked the communication systems, onboard recorder, and broadcast radio. While engineers kept improving the Vostok spacecraft and conducted test flights, future cosmonauts underwent training and were prepared for their first space flights. They took up sports, learned special disciplines, completed parachute training, and also developed their resistance to spaceflight conditions. The future cosmonauts were trained in the centrifuge to withstand extreme gravity, in the temperature chamber to withstand high temperatures, and in the soundproof chamber to resist loneliness. They were also trained for zero gravity in a special plane. Soon, it turned out that there was not enough time for all the cosmonauts to complete the full training course with the Vostok spacecraft mock-up. 6 people who matched the spacecraft technical parameters the best in terms of physical condition were chosen. The group consisted of German Titov, Grigory Nelubov, Andrian Nikolaev, Pavel Popovich, Valery Buikovsky, and Yuri Gagarin. At 8:25, the cabin was checked for leaks. 15 minutes before liftoff, Gagarin donned his spacesuit gloves. 10 minutes before liftoff, he closed his helmet. 5 minutes before liftoff, a metal truss with service platforms and an elevator were pulled away from the rocket. For several months, the 6 candidates intensively studied the spacecraft and were trained on the simulator. In January 1961, examinations began. They lasted for 2 days. On the first day, the future cosmonauts took turns sitting inside the cabin of the Vostok spacecraft mock-up and described the purpose of the spacecraft, its equipment, and the cosmonauts' actions at various stages of the flight to the commission. On the following day, they passed theoretical examinations. Based on the results, the commission rated cosmonauts on their flight readiness. Yuri Gagarin topped the list.
Дорогие друзья, близкие и незнакомые, соотечественники, люди всех стран и континентов, через несколько минут могучий космический корабль унесет меня в далекие просторы Вселенной. Что можно сказать вам в эти последние минуты перед стартом? Вся моя жизнь кажется мне сейчас одним прекрасным мгновением. Все, что прожито, что сделано прежде, было прожито и сделано ради этой минуты.
At 9:07, the liftoff command was given. The rocket began to rise slowly. At that moment, Yuri Gagarin said the famous phrase, 11 minutes and 27 seconds later, the third stage separated and the Vostok 1 spacecraft entered Earth orbit. It was the first time a human being went into space. Yuri Gagarin was the first person who saw our planet from space with his own eyes. He gazed out in admiration at its beauty. After the flight, Gagarin wrote a message to everyone. Orbiting Earth in the spaceship, I saw how beautiful our planet is. People, let us preserve and increase this beauty, not destroy it. The first flight into space was carefully prepared. However, it was a big risk. Several potentially dangerous situations occurred during the flight. First, the radio control for the third stage engines failed, but the engineers had thought through various contingencies, which meant the spacecraft had a fallback option. The engines automatically cut off, but half a second later, resulting in flying 100 kilometers higher than planned. After the deorbit burn, the instrument module did not separate from the descent vehicle with the cosmonaut. The spacecraft began to spin at a very high speed. Only at an altitude of 110 kilometers did the thermal sensors of the backup separation system go off, and the instrument module separated. Right when it seemed the flight was almost over, Yuri Gagarin faced another problem. After ejecting from the capsule, he descended with the main parachute. But at an altitude of 3 kilometers, the emergency parachute deployed. Gagarin was drifting down to Earth under 2 parachutes. He could not effectively control his descent. Nearly at the ground, he was descending backwards. Just 7 seconds before landing, he was able to turn around, which allowed him to land confidently and softly. Despite all the issues, Yuri Gagarin and the equipment developed by hundreds of specialists successfully coped with each challenge. Thus, the first cosmonaut returned to Earth safe and sound. The whole country welcomed its hero with open arms. And at the end of April, Yuri Gagarin was sent abroad on a so-called mission of peace and charmed everyone with his smile. His contemporaries remember one trip in particular. In July 1961, Yuri Gagarin was invited to the United Kingdom. He spent several days there and met workers, scientists, and the Prime Minister. On the day of his departure, Queen Elizabeth II also wanted to meet the first cosmonaut. And Yuri Gagarin cheerfully agreed to extend his stay. They had lunch at Buckingham Palace. While they were bidding farewell, Elizabeth II wanted to take a photo with the first cosmonaut, contrary to etiquette. Later on, she explained her decision to journalists by stating that Gagarin was not an ordinary earthly man, but a heavenly one. Therefore, there was no violation of royal etiquette. Yuri Gagarin traveled all over the world. He visited more than 20 countries. Everywhere he went, Gagarin was greeted with the greatest honor. He achieved the dream of all people and paved the way for humans to explore space.